All right, let's see. This is working. Okay, I think we're live. All right, we're live. Okay. Hey everyone, happy Sunday. Hope you're all doing well. Thank you for joining me in this session. Sorry, it's been a month since the last session. So I've lost my weekly rhythm here. But here we are back in our monthly live sacred space sessions. Thank you for all your patience as we sort of figure out our schedule and adjust to what hopefully will be, a continued emergence out of full pandemic anyway. But we're back here, delighted to be back. And I want to say, as always, that I'm honored to be with you here in this time of sensitivity, change, transformation. And I look forward to sharing time with you in our shared sacred space together today. So what we'll do here in our time together in sacred space, as always, is we'll start by setting sacred space, which I'll start in a moment. And then we'll have our overall topic for this month, which this month will be how to work with your muse. Now, we've talked about the muse in past sessions. I think the last big one was maybe a year ago. We were looking at the last session. It was June of 2020. But the story that Gowrie chose from her muse led us into this kind of reflection on how to work with one's muse more generally. So that's what we'll talk about today. We'll have a bit of an exercise that comes from that. And then after that, we will close sacred space. Okay. So I'll start the process of opening sacred space now by saying that what we would like to do here is to create a space together which is devoid of fear, threat, and control. Okay, a sacred space which is devoid of fear, threat, and control, in order for us to be able to open to higher guidance from within our own selves internally. However you define that, it could be a muse or a spirit or a deity, your God, ancestors. It could be just random flashes of brilliant insight and intuition, right? However you kind of relate to the place where you get inspiration. It could just be, hey, I don't know. Whenever I take a shower, go for a long run, I get downloads and I figure out what to do next with my life. And I don't talk to it particularly. I don't acknowledge it as a thing. I don't know what it is. That's fine too. All of that counts. However you got to do it, that's how you got to do it. So a safe sanctuary space for us all to relax and surrender with no feeling of danger or threat, so that we can partake of the emotional nourishment and the spiritual nourishment that comes from being in sacred space together as a group. And in opening sacred space today, I will propose, as I always do, that we all follow the 4 principles of proceeding in sacred space. The first principle is confidentiality. So standard Vegas rules, what happens in sacred space stays in sacred space. Now, because we're online, the stream is public, the replay will be public. The way we handle confidentiality is via anonymization, right? So if you would like to be anonymous, you don't have to be anonymous, but if you would like to be anonymous, you would come in off the Facebook stream or the YouTube stream and into Crowdcast here. And then you would go into your Crowdcast profile, edit profile feature, and then just change your username to Harry Potter or Mickey Mouse or what have you. If you're already anonymous enough wherever you are watching, then that's fine too. And then you come back in and then you can chat, ask questions, interact with other people under that anonymized username, only if you want. The second principle is that there is no threat or controlling, no fixing or tough love, right? So the idea here is that in sacred space, we don't, obviously, please don't threaten or be hostile to each other, right? But also, even if it's well-meaning, like tough love, or it's like, this is going to hurt me more than it hurts you, but you need to hear this. Now, there's nothing wrong with that per se, right? But because that is of the physics of fear, threat, and control, right? Sort of, you better do this or else you're going to stay in pain and feel like a dunderhead, right? Because it's of fear, threat, and control, it is of the provenance of the profane. Now, and as we always say, there's nothing wrong with the profane. The profane is not bad. It's just different, right? It's just like salty and sweet. There's nothing wrong with salty. It's just different. And we want a blend of both in our lives. So here in this, couple of hours a month, we come together in order to create sacred space together, so that we can do the things that you can only kind of get done in sacred space. Like when you go to the bank because there are certain things you can only get done in person at the bank, and that's fine. So there are certain things that you could only get done in sacred space. So we create that space. So while we're in this space, we ask that there's no interventions, no curing, no fixing, no tough love. We're here and outside the space, we can go back to that. That's fine. But here we are holding space for each other to be however we are, right? So if you find yourself afraid or anxious, right, we don't say, oh, no, take this, drink this, read this book, and you won't be anxious anymore. No, if you're afraid or anxious, we hold space for you to be however you are. If you're happy and relaxed, we don't say, hey, this will give you an even bigger thrill. Or we don't say, well, you shouldn't be. Look at the state of the world around us. We leave you as you are. We hold space for you to be happy and relaxed. If you're afraid and anxious and you feel incompetent and horrible that you're afraid and anxious, we don't fix that. We hold space for you. If you're happy and relaxed and you feel good, or you feel guilty about feeling happy and relaxed, we hold space for you, right? That's the idea. So the second principle, no threat, no controlling, no fixing, no tough love. We leave you as you are, but we don't walk away. We stay with you in presence, and we don't interfere. The third principle, which is a corollary to the first two, is that there is also no commerce, right? So nothing may be sold or recommended or suggested. I can't sell you anything. Gowrie can't sell you anything. Please refrain from selling things to each other in the chat, right? But the idea, and I've gone into this in detail in other sessions, commerce is, a form of threat, right? So if you would like to have a beautiful mane of hair, right, you will take my hair tonic, right, for the low price of et cetera, right? And the implied threat, not malicious, but the implied threat is, if you don't take this, you won't grow the hair. If you don't buy this right away, you won't get the discount. There's nothing wrong with that in the world of the profane. But in the space of the sacred, we're trying to let go of fear, threat, and control for just a couple of hours. So we don't sell you anything here, right? I mean, if you're on my email list, I'll still send you emails. But in sacred space, we don't do that. We are here in this space for your energy. Not for the things you bring. We are here for what you are, not for your value add, not for what you do or provide. Okay. The fourth principle, another corollary, is no expectation of participation. So there's no pressure to do anything here in the sacred space. You are free of threat or expectation, or, why don't you ask a question? Why don't you chat? Why don't you watch all the way to the end? You don't have to do any of that. You can come and go as you please. Please try to, take care of other people and hold space for them as well. But other than that, there's no expectation, right? So again, we're here. The nourishment of sacred space comes from the held space and our mutual and collective presence and attention, from what you are, not from what you do or provide. And so obviously, as we've said in past sessions, you can create sacred space on your own, solo, in meditation, going for a run, giving yourself time and space to reflect quietly. But when we come together in sacred space as a group, all of us together tends to amplify that. It's like a big potluck dinner party, right? Where it's like, I bring my one portion of holding space, power, and the sacred, but then all of it together becomes like greater than any one of us could ever consume on our own. So it's this great feast of emotional and spiritual nourishment. And the four principles are designed to help facilitate that. Okay, so this is what I propose. And if you are not okay with that, that's totally okay. We're just going to give you a moment now to pause so you can make your selection and either choose to stay or withdraw from the group. If you withdraw from the group, that's totally okay. There's no fear, threat, or control to get you to even come or stay in the group. We'll still catch up with you later in profane space. We're still friends. We'll still hang out. No worries at all. But for now, we are about to cross the threshold into our sacred space together. So if this is not the correct plane you want to be on, this is the time to disembark from the plane. Okay, so I'll just pause here for a moment and let everyone make their selection. Okay. And now for the rest of us, we will now move forward together into our shared sacred space. And as we cross the threshold together now into our shared sacred space, I will just give a gentle reminder that in this space, we would like to observe the 4 principles of preceding sacred space: confidentiality / anonymization, no fear, threat, or control, no interventions, no tough love, no commerce, not even suggestions or recommendations, even if you're not financially benefiting from them. It's the threat, it's not whether you benefit, right? And then fourthly, no expectation of participation. All right. Welcome back to Sacred Space, everyone. Hope you've all had a good month. And I hope you all are happy, safe, and healthy wherever you are in the world today. All right, so let's move to our topic for this month's session. Our topic this month will be how to work with your muse. So in our brainstorm call for the session, Gary, my editor in Bangalore, and I, she will typically bring a fairy tale or a myth that her muse kind of serves up to her. And then she reads it. I read it as a dream, and I'll explain all that as we get into it. And this brainstorm brought us into a reflection on some of, not all obviously, but some of the physics of working with the muse, the sort of feminine kind of outside guide, part of us within, however you define it, and some of the universal kind of principles of engaging with her and working with her in a sustainable way over time. How does the muse come into you? How do you encounter her at first? Right? How do you stay in deep generative flow with her? So these are some of the questions we'll cover today. So to kick us off, we will read the story that she brought up, which is a story from the Japanese folk tradition. So we'll do that and then kind of let the golden thread lead us from there. So Gary, if you're there, if my stream is still connected, please come on up and tell us about the story. Hello.
Hi.
Hi, Gary. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, very good.
Sound okay? Okay,
yeah,
good.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So tell us about the story you selected. Yeah.
Yeah, so I've come across this story before many times. It's a Japanese folktale called The Crane Wife. And it comes up quite often when you're looking up for folktales from different traditions. And there was also one of these sessions where I was particularly drawn to tell a folktale about cranes. And there were 2 choices. I had one which was the Crabben crane, and one was this. And I went with the other one because I also had additional, dream support to make that one. But this one kind of always made me a bit uncomfortable because I felt like the story was a bit sad, and I didn't know how to come to terms with that, right? So it took me a while to kind of realize, well, it's like a dream. It's a piece of story that comes to you, and it comes to you like a dream and presents itself. You take the message, right? I mean, regardless of how you feel about it. I mean, not all dreams make you feel good, and that's something personally I've had to reconcile with. So that's why I've put it off for so long. And this time I thought, it's really time. I think I'm ready to kind of look into it and take the message. So I brought it to you then. So that's how the story came up.
Good.
Yeah.
Do you want to jump in and tell it?
Yeah, it's a very short story, so
Okay.
I have no time. So let me tell you what the story is. So the story is called The Crane Wife. All right, and this is from Japan. So once upon a time in Japan, there was a poor young man who was a farmer. And one day when he was working on his farm, suddenly there was this white crane that came, swooping down from the sky at great speed, and it fell at his feet. And when this farmer looked at it, he then realized that the bird was injured and she had like a sharp arrow stuck in her wing. And he felt very sad, and he decided to kind of nurse the crane and take care of the crane. So first he pulled out the arrow from the wing and he cleaned the wound, and he nursed the bird until she was fit to sort of fly again. So the crane then, she took off to the sky, and the young man said, "Oh, please be careful, avoid bird hunters, and take care of yourself." And listening to this, the crane circled 3 times over his head and then flew away. And that evening, the man worked until dark in his farm, and then he decided to go back to his house. And a miracle happened. So when he arrived at home, he saw a beautiful young woman, and she was waiting for him at home. He'd never seen this woman before, but she said to him, "Welcome home, and I'm your wife." And the young man was really surprised. He said, "Well, I'm a very poor guy. I can't take care of you as my wife." And the lady said, "Well, you don't have to worry. We have plenty of rice, and we could live happily together." And then he saw another miracle. And there was this small sack of rice in the corner, and she would cook from it every day. And the sack of rice was always full. It never got empty. And the man was very happy to have this lovely wife, and they had no worries. And as days passed by, the wife then asked her husband to build a room for her. And she said, "I need a weaving room, and please do this for me as a favor." So the husband did that. He finished building the room, and then the wife said to him, "I will go into the room, and you must promise me that you will never look inside. You'll never take a peek." And the husband said, "All right, okay." So she went into the room and she shut the door on herself. And she started to weave. For 7 days, she didn't come out of the room, or even once. And then finally, when she came out of the room, she held like the most beautiful silk cloth this man had ever seen. And then she gave this to her husband, and she said, "Go and sell it at the market, and you'll fetch a good price for it." So the next day, the young man took it to the town, sold it to the market. He got a lot of money for it. He came back home and was very happy. And again, the next day, the wife went back into the weaving room, and she continued to weave. And this happened several times. And some traditions, they say this went on for a while. And every time the wife came out of the room with a beautiful silk cloth, she started to look more and more pale. She looked ill. And so the husband was really curious. So the first thing is that he doesn't know what she uses to weave. I mean, he hasn't seen like a roll of silk yarn or anything. What does she weave with, right? And how does she come up with this beautiful piece of cloth? And why does she look ill? So he got so curious that he decided to break the promise, and he peeked inside the room while the wife was there. And then he saw, instead of his lovely wife, he saw a beautiful crane weaving a cloth, plucking out its own feathers and using them as threads. And the crane noticed the man taking a peek into the room, and she spoke to him and said, "I'm the crane whose life you saved the other day, and I wanted to repay you, so I became your wife. but now that you've seen me in this actual form, I can't stay here, right? So she handed him the cloth that she'd woven so far and said, I'll leave you this cloth to remember me. And then she flew away from the site and disappeared forever. So that's the story. So Artie, would you like to come back up and tell me your thoughts? Hi.
That's it?
That's like also the shortest story we've shared here.
That's not a Hollywood story. Where's the sequel? Where's my feel good at the end of it?
It really bothered me for a long time.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that story.
Thank you.
And I'll ask the question I usually ask to begin, which is, so where do you enter into that story?
So the first thing that fascinated me about the story, I've got to say, is how the story began. And the fact that, she would go into this room and then weave this beautiful cloth reminded me a lot of this European folktale. I don't know if many people would be familiar with it. It's quite a popular story, The Shoemaker and the Elves. Right. So when the elves come in at night and they kind of make shoes, beautiful shoes that the cobbler then realizes in the morning that they were made overnight. So it had this magical quality of that story without, and yet that story is kind of so much happier, right? But here there is an exchange. It's the similar motifs are there's an exchange of compassion towards each other and gratitude towards each other, right? And then there is this magical weaving and giving of a gift. So there are all these themes which are very similar, and yet there is a different twist to it. So I got curious as to why the story was kind of has a different tone, and a different shape from the European folktale. So what was the message it was trying to convey differently from the other one, right? So that's what drew me into the story first.
I mean, I love that. So when we did our brainstorm, I definitely appreciated the connection with the shoemaker and elf story. And for my part, it reminded me of other fairy tales as well. In particular, there's a story I tell on the sort of more live group advising side on what we used to call a continuing healing series. But the story we tell in that series, which is called the Frog Princess, from the Russian tradition, where I don't know if he's named Ivan, but it's basically Ivan and then the princess Vasilisa, right? And how they go around and round. This is almost like the sort of reverse counterpart of the classic Princess and the Frog story. Here it's the prince and the frog princess, where the feminine is in this sort of lost board member kind of exiled kind of form. And there's a very similar thing where and I won't give the whole story away, but he not only peaks, but he also interferes. He also interferes and ends up, blasting the two of them apart. Now, in the Russian version of the story, it doesn't end right there. It goes on, and he goes through like all these different realms and these different. Those of you who are familiar with perhaps from your childhood, right? There's the egg, and then the tree, and then the bear that knocks over the tree, revealing the coffin, et cetera, before he finally gets to the realm of Vasilisa and attempts to win her back. And so, well, before I dive into that, I should probably just take the pause and give the usual kind of setup for those of you who may not be familiar or maybe new to live group advising. is that when we read these dreams or fairy tales, there's a particular lens we use to read them with, which is what I call a mythopoetic lens. And the key, and it's a fancy word for something relatively straightforward, which is when we read these stories, myths, fairy tales, dreams, you can even read your regular happenings in real life and regular waking time with this lens as well. We read them mythopoetically, which means that we regard every major actor in the narrative as representing a different part of your own inner self. Okay. So every major actor in this story is read as a different part of you. It's still you, but a different part of you. And you may say, well, there's only one me. I mean, this is the natural assumption. We live in a sort of patriarchal society based on the idea of monotheism, right, where there's only one God. But in the Catholic version, right, it's 2,000 years old, so it's a little bit more developed. So there's only one God, but he/she is a trinity. So it's monotheistic, but it's a trinity. And with the Catholic version, there's an entire pantheon of saints where we build cathedrals to them. We can sort of make donations, light votive candles, pray for them, negotiate with them. But we don't call them gods. We call them saints because there's only one God. So like I said in the beginning, if that's the way you got to do it, that's the way you got to do it. But the general idea here is that there is a multiplicity of voices within you. And the simplest way of describing that is like after dinner, you're like, what do you want for your dessert? And you're like, well, on the one hand, I'd like chocolate cake. On the other hand, I'd like vanilla ice cream, right? And these two quote unquote hands are different voices within you that want different things. It's still you. It's just different parts of you. And that's okay. It's not pathological. There's nothing wrong with you. So when we read a story like this, we say the crane is you. The crane is you, part of your inner feminine. The hunter is you. The poor man is you. And you can go even further, right? The sack of rice is you. The hut, the room, the special room he builds for her is a part of you. Every major actor or object is a symbol of a different part of you. And so for this story, the way I kind of, start off is you look at the physics of what's going on here is that there is basically an encounter in the beginning of the story, a serendipitous encounter where the poor man who is a hunter, and we've seen this hunter inner masculine motif in our various stories. I think the Swan Princess, where there was a hunter who was hunting at night in the forest, and then all the Swan sisters came and were bathing, and he tried to sort of marry the youngest sister, right? So this hunter motif, the part of your inner masculine that goes into the deep dark forest, right, the symbol of the unexplored parts of your inner kingdom, right, encounters this aspect of the inner feminine who has the power to bestow boons, to bestow gifts and superpowers, which is kind of how we start to associate in our brainstorm, this time anyway, this crane feminine figure with the Muse. Now, there's a lot to say about the Muse. I think Gary will leave a link to how we talk about the Muse, like that session from a year ago, so I won't have to go over all that again. But the basic physics here are that he encounters this feminine kind of superpower crane figure who is in trouble or pretending to be in trouble, okay? And from his spontaneous compassion, said another way, for no good reason, he expresses his sincerity and worthiness. He helps the crane and nurses her back to health for no good reason. Right? Why do you even help a crane? A crane is a bird. You can't. It doesn't promise you anything. He doesn't make any deals with it, right? I mean, the number one rule of fairy tales is you can deal, you can make deals, negotiate in good faith, but you can negotiate. He doesn't even negotiate with it, right? We don't eat cranes, right? We don't use their feathers for our pillows, right? So you can't eat it, you can't profit it from it, you don't really capture it. You can moralize that, well, he's just a generally good person, but that doesn't really tell you anything, right? There's really just no good reason. There's no good reason for him to help this crane, and yet he does. And in past sessions, we've talked about the 3 levels of will: need versus want versus desire. And we've talked about the fact that the highest level, the desire level, is where you do things for no good reason, right? Need is where you do things just to survive. Want is where you do things that, in the context of the healing work we do and the healing programs we do, want is where you do things to mitigate the pain of an emotional wound that's within you, right? So I don't need to have a big prestigious job where I make more money than I can ever spend, but I want to. And I want to because all that extra money, the checks I write for philanthropic things, they soothe a certain kind of wound within me, perhaps of incompetence, perhaps of unworthiness. So I want that. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with need, want, or desire. But want is driven by, need is driven by necessity. Want is driven typically by pain. By pain. And desire then is driven by, at least in the realm of the profane, where everything's fear, threat, and control, is driven by no sense of fear, threat, or control. There's no gun to my head. There's nothing I need or want, and I'm doing it anyway for no good reason. And when we say for no good reason, that's the perspective of the profane, right? Your dad says, why are you playing that bass guitar? You know, how are you going to make money as a musician, right? Who's going to love you? Who's going to want to marry you? How are you going to build a stable life for your children? You know, and you say, but I like my guitar, right? And he's like, I don't know why you do things for no good reason, right? No good reason in the realm of need and want. In the realm of desire, there are reasons for that, where we teach bliss and how to find your bliss. That's where we sort of mine the sort of depths of desire. But from the realm of profane, when I'm watching somebody follow her desire, I'm like, there's no reason for her to do that, right? There's no prestige, there's no money, there's no protection, there's no anything. And yet people do things for no good reason all the time. And the question is, why is that? So anyway, the highest level of desire is where you do things for no good reason. The act of rescuing this crane is an act of desire, and therefore related to his bliss. Now, there are countless sessions where we talked about bliss. There's a whole program where we dive into bliss. I don't know if Gary wants to, I don't think you can paste all of them, but the bottom line is that the act of rescuing this crane is an act of desire, and an act of desire is related to your bliss, because the things you do for no good reason are the hidden reason is that it is your bliss, which is unique to you. Nobody has your exact bliss. Okay. And your bliss is the thing that you will to do, that you are drawn to do, that may give you things you need and want, but is completely orthogonal to that, right? So one of the tricks of how we try to sort of isolate, the thread, the golden thread of your bliss is like in the bliss program, one of the questions we'll ask is like, when you're a child and, you're at home and bored out of your skull, endless summer, but you're like at home. What did you find yourself doing for no good reason? There's no reading list for the summer. You don't have to study. You don't have to do any classes. Everything's fine at home, plenty to eat. Nobody's in any stress. I'm just lying around with like endless days, right? And feeling good. What do you end up doing? Whatever it is you end up doing, however random or weird, that's a breadcrumb, golden thread that can potentially lead you to your desire if you follow it gently without breaking it, right? And there are a million ways we break it, and we talk about those in our other sessions. And so what's fascinating here is that he does this supportive space holding things, because to heal someone, to heal a crane, is to hold space for the crane, right? And you're holding space for this crane for no good reason, right? There's no benefit from the crane in the world of the profane. You can't eat it, you can't really use its feathers, you can't do anything with it. A crane in multiple cultural traditions is a sacred animal. Generally in dreams, when you see birds, they're symbols of, they're air beings, right? And the air realm is the realm of the spirit. The regular realm, the land animals, is the realm of like the regular world, and then the underworld is the realm typically of the soul, right? So spirit is up, lofty, soul is down, juicy, messy, smelly, scary, right? So spirit is up, soul is down, and crane is a being of the spirit, and typically a bringer of bounty and boon, of gifts that come to you which you don't deserve, right? You haven't traded for these gifts; they just come to you like the rain from heaven. In Western tradition, the crane comes up in numerous places, but for instance, like just in popular culture, even surviving to the present day, the stork, right? The stork is the one who brings babies and the fruits of generativity. So anyway, he rescues this bird, this symbol of boons and generativity and bounty of the spirit. So he starts this connection with this part of and these are both parts of you, right? So the practical hunting part of you starts this connection with this more spiritual boon bringer, bounty bringer part of you, not knowing that's what she is. And then the crane then circles around him 3 times, right? 3, as we've said in the past, is a symbol of cycle, right? 1, 2, 3, ABC. We speak of completion and cycles in terms of 3, right? We say morning, noon, and night, right? There's also dusk and dawn. There's also mid-morning, but it's not a 6-phase cycle. It's a 3-phase cycle. We say caterpillar, cocoon, butterfly, right? There's a million different cycles that happen in between those 3, but 3 archetypally is a symbol of cyclical kind of dynamics. So she circles around him 3 times, a symbol of this cycle moving forward, right? And then the next step is he gets this crane goddess as his wife. He doesn't even go after her. He doesn't court her. She just shows up. She's already his wife. And it's like consent-wise, he didn't even marry her. He didn't ask her to marry him. There was no ceremony, but she shows up and he is already his wife, right? How does that happen, right? Where is the consent in that situation? Well, it happens because the hunter is a part of you and the crane is a part of you. Right, when your liver and lungs and kidneys and stomach come to some agreement, right? You're like, well, did my stomach consent? And it's like, it's just this thing where it's harmonious, it works together. And we don't think of them as separate things, right? Because they're all a part of the larger you. Can your stomach vote to secede and leave your body, right? The answer is no. But it still has a say, right? You can still get upset stomach if your body is trying to give you signals. So he gets the crane goddess as his wife. The story here is not exactly clear. Does he put 2 and 2 together? Does he get that this is the crane that he rescued? Right? Do you get, for instance, that, what's a good example here? When you start to speak more nicely to yourself, perhaps as a result of healing work that you've done, you're less sarcastic and eye-rolling to random ideas that come to you. You're like, you don't call them childish anymore. You're like, well, I don't know. If I'm a guy and I like knitting, maybe it's okay to knit. Maybe it's okay to knit. Right? So you heal the crane from injury. And then before you even knit, as you even consider maybe being okay with, being this like 6 foot, tough, very like manly, sexy guy who knits, before you even do it, just the attitudinal change separately here on like the book you're writing or whatever, it just starts flowing like crazy, right? That's exactly what this dynamic is here. You're more gentle to this part. You hold space for it for no good reason, right? Knitting won't get you anywhere. And then separately, seemingly, on the work side, on the creative side, stuff starts to flow like crazy. All these boons start falling from heaven. Do you put two and two together? Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. Okay. But when this crane lands, she starts cranking out the boons. There's a sack full of rice, endless nourishment. You will never starve, right? And food in a dream, it's in sacred space. So it's not necessarily biological nourishment, but the rice is a symbol of like the kind of nourishment we have here in sacred space: emotional nourishment, spiritual nourishment, right? He never goes hungry again in those realms because and it worked. I mean, when you're nice to yourself, it doesn't matter if you knit or not, right? If you're nice to yourself and you hold space for yourself, it stands to reason that you will never starve for emotional and spiritual nourishment again, because the one you're withholding rice from is yourself, right? You're the one stopping your own hand from lifting the fork to your mouth. That's a little bit of a simplistic view of it, but it's still, hopefully makes it simple, but not simpler, right? And then the scarf, of course, brings money, which in a dream is a symbol of ego power, right? So money is ego power. In certain Christian traditions, money is the root of all evil, but we still work hard for it anyway. So we have these different parts of ourselves at war with each other, but it's monotheistic, so it can't possibly be two different parts that I need to reconcile. So you never even acknowledge the conflict, let alone try to reconcile it. You're just like, one side must be bad, I'm going to pound it down. And of course it comes back, and any part you stuff down, eventually it will come back and destroy the world you've built, because the world does not accommodate it. And it is a valid part of you. Okay. So anyway, with ego power, this opening of the connection to spirit, this muse of the crane, okay, brings you spiritual and emotional nourishment, and then also brings you ego power, right? If you're a rock star, you're like struggling, you finally say, okay, I'm just going to write whatever songs I want to write. I don't care about popularity. I don't care about making money. Screw it. I'm just going to write what I want to write, and you nurse the crane. Then the crane starts cranking out, right? The songs you write are this endless spiritual and emotional nourishment. And without even wanting that to happen, your songs touch a chord in the collective mind, and you become famous, like a Bob Dylan or something, right? And you receive all this ego power, screaming fans, money out coming out of your ears. This is kind of a diorama of the way this happens sometimes. And unbeknownst to him, this is actually through some measure of hardship on her part, right? She gives him a scarf that brings him money, ego power, by plucking out her own feathers, okay? So that's the first part of this very, very short story. It's very short, but it's very, very nutrient dense and concentrated. So then everything's going great. Everything's going great. And he's actually given the one injunction: just don't peek in the hut. And let's talk about the hut. The muse comes to you and says, I need a room of my own. I need a room that's just mine, not even ours, that's just mine, within your house. Within your house, right? What is that room? That is sacred space. That is held space. The very muscles that you build when you come to sacred space sessions like this, and just feel it, inhale it. And then in the regular world, in your regular life, when you start to say, what kind of space do I need for my child, for my lover, for my friend, right? Somatically, you feel like, oh, it's that kind of space that Artie called sacred space. And I've experienced it for over a year now. I've experienced this sacred space. So from your body, from muscle memory, you can adjust and build your own hut, right? I can drop you in a forest and you can build your own sacred space because you know how it feels, right? And that's why at the beginning of every session, I give you the building principles. I give you the 4 principles of sacred space. I mean, you can edit them and adjust them as you want, but those are the basic physics of how we construct this hut. And very significantly, to me anyway, the muse comes to you and says, I need my own sacred space. And what's interesting is there's no negotiation because he's in the flow, right? So when the muse says, build me a hut, it just happens. Like in the story, it doesn't even say, well, it's just magically, it just appears. Okay. So this hut is the space within you. That is the space where the muse, who is also part of you, can do whatever she wants in total safety and privacy and completely hermetically sealed off from any levers of fear, threat, or control from you. Okay. It's like, it's like a rock star, right? Even Bob Dylan, when he stopped playing folk music and started playing like what his detractors called rock and roll music, he was just like, I'm not trying to make more money. I have enough of everything. I'm just going in this direction because the muse is telling me to go. And eventually he had to compromise. He played a little of both at every concert. And after the folk stuff, and he started playing the rock stuff, half the audience would like leave and boo him. And he was just like, I thought you guys liked my muse. And the profane world was like, we like this part, we don't like that part. Or Picasso, when he went from his blue period to his Cubist period, nobody bought any of the Cubist works in the beginning. And his dealer, they almost went bankrupt. His dealer was like, all you need to do is take a napkin and just put a blue magic marker on it and I can sell it. Right? You can paint this Cubist shit all you want, just do a little so we can keep printing money. And he's like, my friend, I don't like to starve any more than you do, but you're talking as if, I have a choice. Right? And that's how powerful the muse is in a person like Picasso or Dylan, where it's like, even if it means the world of the profane comes and like punishes you, it's not at the level of need or want. Right? If I stop making money, then I stop making money. I'm at the level of desire. Why do I start painting Cubists or playing rock music when the world loves me for folk music? The answer is, I'm not trying to spite anyone either. It's just for no good reason. Right? And these are artists, humans who are operating very, very fully at the level of desire. And the warning is, after you operate at that level for a while, there is this feeling that your measure of choice and sovereignty as a human being kind of goes out the window. I mean, you can reclaim it, but it's like, why would you? Right? You're flowing with the muse. It's like, what's better than this? What else would you want? All right, what else would you want? So he's at this level. Everything's going great. And she basically says, this sacred space of the muse needs to be sacrosanct, right? You can't peek in the room, period. Okay. And there's all kinds of things we can say about this, but just to keep things moving. And of course, what happens is almost cliche. It's so common, right? She gives him the instruction. You can't peek too closely. You can't look too closely. There is a measure of curiosity about what is happening here that will never be satisfied. A door that must never be opened, right? And as long as you don't open it, everything will be okay. The good times will keep on rolling. And almost always they can't resist and they open the door anyway. So we'll talk more about that. What I love about the story is that the story is short. Right? We've always said that fairy tales are like different zoom in dioramas of different parts of the labyrinth of life, right? Of the different cycles and twists and turns that we go through. So this story looks just at this very short sort of sub bullet point of like, you get the crane wife through compassion, doing things for no reason. She asked for her own space, you give it. She starts cranking out the boons, you enjoy them, and she says, do not step over the line of my sacred space. And he does. And then he loses the crane wife, and that's it. Right? Typically, like with the story of Princess Vasilisa, then Ivan like embarks on the next stage of the story to like get her back. Right? And all the symbolism there gives clues as to how to get your muse back after you've lost her. But the fragment given by this Japanese folktale is cut short. Because the bullet point of this story, right, and it's very clean in that sort of Japanese sort of, in terms of the chi or the ki of sort of Japanese, kind of the energy of the Japanese folk tradition. It's like you encounter the muse, you engage with her for no good reason, you protect her spontaneously out of compassion, you violate her principle, and then you lose her. That's it. We're not going to rush ahead to how to get her back. You lose her, and that's the end of the story until like next week or next month's story. And the idea is it's clean, it's minimalistic, and then you sit with that consequence and you reflect on it. Right? What is this violation of the sacred space? Right? What is this violation of the sacred space? To me, it is a number of things. So number one, it is if the muse tells you to do something, then you just follow for no good reason. It doesn't matter if it makes sense or not. She says don't peek, so it's like just don't peek. That's number one. So respecting the sovereignty of the muse. Right? It doesn't matter if it doesn't make sense. Right? The fact that your songs are worldwide popular, the fact that everyone loves your cubist or blue paintings, it's like that makes no sense, and yet it is. And you accept it and you enjoy it. So when she tells you other things, then you follow those too for no good reason. Okay, so that's number one. Number two is typically the impulse to peak is that, okay, I've got this goose that's laying the golden eggs. I can't just be happy with the golden eggs. I want to like, dissect the goose and find out what in its ovaries are like making these golden eggs, right? Presumably so that I can like clone the goose or put the goose's like egg making, gold making pheromones or enzymes into its test tube and make 1 million golden eggs. In other words, it is this impulse of the profane. Right, where I can't just accept the gifts of the muse. I can't just accept the rain falling from the sky. I have to go up and like, control the weather. Right, fear, threat, and control. Letting go and leaving the sacred as sacred and the mysterious as mysterious is an act of surrender. Right, and just letting her run the show. Right, you don't say it's an endless bag of rice. Why isn't it an endless bag of wheat? Why isn't it an endless bag of caviar? Right? And the reason why it's rice is the same reason you helped the muse in the first place, for no good reason. Right? And you surrender to her. And so the universal law of working with the muse in one sense is to keep the flow going. You stay in your state of surrender. In other words, you stay in the state of the sacred. If it's rice today and it's a scarf tomorrow, whatever, all good. All good. Right? If I'm painting blues today and I'm painting cubist paintings tomorrow, that's fine. Right? I'm not doing this to make money in the realm of need and want. I'm doing this to be close to you. Right? The artwork is just a byproduct. It's just the woohoo fun that we have together. But the actual kind of reward or boon of the artist is that you get to hang out with the crane wife. Right? It's like we lose sight of the fact that like the hunter gets the rice and gets the scarf. We lose sight of the fact that we're like, oh, this endless bag of rice. We lose sight of the fact that like he gets to be the husband of the crane wife. It's like that's the ultimate boon. That's the ultimate boon, right? And when your crane wife tells you to not do something, it's like just don't do it. Don't do it. sometimes in these stories, right, it's like the father or the uncle says, why don't you show me this person? Let's sneak in and find out the secret so we can make 10 sacks of endless rice. Let's try to capture and control, right? Bring it into the profane. And the general rule is that never works. It never works, right? There are physics at play that you are not aware of. So you see her plucking her own feathers out. What does that even mean, right? How does she even make the feathers? I mean, there are a million that you haven't learned anything. All you've done is you've lost the crane, right? So now she's got a bunch of feathers there. Do you know how to make the scarf? No. Do you know how to make the next endless bag of rice? No. And even if you did, all you would know is how to make the rice sack. You wouldn't know the 10 million other things that you don't even know exist that you would bring to you. Right? It's this petty mindedness of like, well, how do we make this and capture it? It's like, think about where it's coming from and how infinite and inexhaustible that is. And how does anyone in their right mind not spontaneously get on their knees and bow to that? Right? It's like, wake up. It's like, hello. Right? So all you need to do is trust and do as you're told and not get too clever. When you don't do that, you lose the connection. Right? How many other artists and rock stars and playwrights wrote their best stuff when they were struggling and in poverty? Right? And after they become famous, they write crap. Right? It's almost a cliche. Because the fear, threat, and control, the realm of the profane, the fame, the sort of accolades, right? When they know it's not them, it's the thing that's coming through them. And then they lose sight of maintaining the hut and the sanctity of the hut. That's why many artists, athletes get all ornery and not PR, public relations, media friendly. When, sort of journalists start, petty-minded journalists start asking them, well, what is the method of what is the secret of your art? Right. And Dylan would just be like surly and like sarcastic, and everyone would be like, he's such a jerk. Right. But what he's doing is he's protecting the hut. And the world of the profane is like, well, come on, tell us everything. We want to know everything. How do the golden eggs come out? Right. How does the rice sack work? And it's like, even if I opened the hut and showed you, which I'm not going to because she told me not to, even if you saw her plucking feathers out, you still wouldn't be able to do anything she does. Right? Your frame of mind is the problem. It's not that you don't know enough. It's that you're looking in the wrong way. So she tells you exactly what to do. All you have to do is continue listening to her and to try not to stray for as long as you can. Eventually, you will stray. It's life. It's circumambulation. You will lose her. You will screw up eventually. Right? This story is not a warning. It's a diorama of the life cycle of life with the muse. One segment of it. And then the next segment is you go on a long walkabout quest, Parsifal in the wilderness for 30 years before his next shot at asking the Grail question, right? And this is just a zoom in on one part of it. What's interesting here is that when he peaks anyway, just like in the Frog Princess story, she's not angry. She doesn't punish him. Right? She doesn't turn into this demon, sort of fearsome goddess and like throw a lightning bolt at him. She's sad. Right? Because it's not a rule that she has arbitrarily made up. It's a law of physics. Right? There's a line between the sacred and the profane. Where if you have a hut where you keep the sacred pristine, it will throw gifts over the fence to you. And you have no say over what it sends to you, but you can enjoy them if you like. But the minute you break the seal of the sacred, the entire thing vaporizes, right? And the muse is sad too. She loves being with you. Right? It's like this divine, feminine, radiant, visionary goddess. Do you think she can't do whatever she wants? Right? She's with you because she's into you, dude. She's with you because she wants to be, right? And when he breaks that sacred space, her sense is basically, I want to stay with you. I'm your wife. I'm not your, just your whatever friend or a passing vision or whatever. I'm your wife. I'm with you. and I want to stay, but I can't because you've triggered this clause in the physics of the contract. So I cannot stay, even though I'm your wife. Right? So you're like, well, why is that? Right? And that's another peeking behind the veil. It's like, it's for no good reason. Nobody knows why that is. But what I can tell you is, in story after story after story, you see the same physics consistently. If you talk to artists, they will tell you things that will resonate with this, right? The fountain that comes out of you is not yours. It's coming through you. That's fine. You can take credit, make money for it, whatever you want. But it behooves you not privately behind closed doors. It behooves you to not clench it too tightly, not to analyze it or try to understand it too deeply, because this is intrinsically disrespectful. It is not a thing. It is an entity on the other side, right? And if you clench it too tightly, clenching is the felt sense of the profane. Fear, threat, and control is all clenching. Surrender, love, nurturing is all unclenching. So when you try to understand it, when you try to predict it, these are all forms of control. However, when you get to know it as a friend, as a lover, as an equal, as a counterpart, as a colleague, right? That's okay. Not in a way where you're seeking to control or capture it. Right? In other words, it's when you try to understand it so well that you can replicate it or teach it to others as a 5-step guaranteed process. That's when you cross the line. Because the implicit nature of the divine, do I need to even say this out loud? Because the implicit nature of the divine is not to be controlled. And if it's even going to be controlled by anything, it's not going to be controlled by you or me, right? When the divine comes to us to have congress with us, it's a blessing. And when you try to drag it into the profane and it leaves, it's not punishment, it's just the law. When you try to bring a towel into the water, it gets wet. It's not a punishment, it's just the physics of the thing. And the divine is disappointed too. It wanted to keep dancing with you. I've had many experiences like similar to this in my own journey. And I'll just give you a short example of something from myself. So years ago, when I was really sort of just getting downloads on understanding how I engage with the muse, it seemed universal. It was very interesting stuff, right? And I had a question for the muse. And my question is, so this inside baseball on how I like interact with you and everything, do I teach this itself to other people? And she was like, no, don't tell anybody about us. And I'm like, okay, cool, no problem. I was just like, I have plenty of other stuff to talk about with my advisees. I mean, you know me, it's like, it's getting me to shut up. That's a trick, right? So it's like, if you don't want me talking about this, I'm cool with that. And my attitude was like, I don't even need to know why, right? My attitude is like, I'm just happy you're even talking to me. This is like lovely. So I didn't talk about it. After about a year plus, I got the follow-on message from her that I can start talking to other people about her. And I wasn't like, oh, but is it okay? Can I talk about this or not? I was just like, oh, okay. So I'll open that like constraint. And like with everything else, I'm like, well, I don't care what I tell people. It really makes no difference to me because I still get to be with you, right? Either way. And only if you want, right? I mean, you leave anytime, obviously. But once she said you can talk to other people about her, even then I didn't ask for the specifics. I'm like, yeah, well, I'll hand you the reins of my speech and you just say whatever you want to people about us, right? Because again, for me in my own experience, my point, my desire, my pleasure, my delight is not necessarily output to the outer world, right? Like I'm not with the muse as a gambit in order to get from like point A to B in some other realm, right? In the regular realm and healing people. I want to heal like 20 million people as a goal or whatever. I have no goal, right? Well, I do have a goal. My main goal is to like continue to delight and frolic in the company of the muse, right? I just like being around her. So if she doesn't want me to tell other people about it, I won't. And if she does, I will. But I try my best to like just give her respect, because I would like to, get to have like my next date with her. So I'm like on my best behavior, right? So that's, the attitude that she is not to be controlled, right? That's like the baseline. I mean, there's all this other stuff beyond that, but it's like, that's the baseline. That's not a bad starting place. That's a pretty safe place to start from. You start from a position of respect, not dominance, and even surrender, but not too much surrender, ideally, right? I mean, think about it this way. Like even Bob Dylan or Picasso, right? You are in daily contact, almost involuntary. She's coming to you in your dreams. There's like no escaping her, right? You are in daily contact with this divine, visionary, glorious feminine that as a byproduct is making all this stuff come out of you. That's making you like this rock star, right? And so where is your like accent? Where is the accent on in your life? Are you like, oh, well, what's my next album going to be so I can even impress even more people in this like profane kind of, by comparison, black and white, very drab world, right? So it's like you're getting these boons from this like glorious paradise world. And all you can think about is like how I'm going to impress people in like the crap world by comparison. And it's not crap. It's all beautiful, right? And I'm like, that's all you can think about? Right? You get to be in the company of the divine, and all you can think about is how many more pearls you're going to get next week so you can cast them in front of swine. Right? So the casting in front of swine is not the goal. Like, there is no goal. It's just you're already in the company of the goddess. What more is there? Right? You're having tea with the goddess. There's no rush to leave. And you're just happy to be there. Like when you get these flashes of inspiration of like, oh, this is the next thing I could teach this. And like, there's no rush. It's like, it'll all come when it comes. Even in the case of this story, right? You can't even say that the hunter losing the crane wife was a loss. I mean, it's a grievous loss, but she can still come. I mean, she can still come back in other forms, right? It's all magical. She can do anything she wants. But the thing is, like, one of the reasons why he peaked was because he also saw that she was pale and looking sick, right? So if you're the young man and she's your wife and you love her, right? In the end, he would be sad, but also you could imagine him thinking, well, at least she's not plucking her own feathers out and making herself sick anymore. Right, so he still has this attitude of compassion where he's peaking in this version of the story, not to control her, but perhaps you can imagine because he's worried about her. And now she's flying away and he's like, well, I've lost her, but at least she's not plucking her own feathers out. Right, and you can imagine that's the kind of attitude in the hunter that would give him even more rewards later on, right? That we can't even imagine, like rainbow waterfalls or whatever, right? But again, the point is that's not why he's doing it. Right? If he feels that way, it's because he spontaneously feels like that, because he loves his wife. Right? So even when you lose the muse, that's part of the path of life. Right? In other stories, they go into the next phases of how you get the muse back. But it's like even loss and the grief resulting from loss is part of this path of life. Okay. One side point here is that one interesting thing here. So you're like, is there a way around this? Are there any alternatives? I mean, maybe this is just the way life goes, but how else could he have handled this, right? One thing, and this is funny, this has come up in a couple conversations with some friends recently about the muse and their experiences with the muse, is that the wife gets ill and he peaks. Let's give him the benefit of the doubt. Let's say that's why he peaks. Okay. What else could he have done? Well, one alternative is that the wife gets ill and he asks her. And I can imagine all the wives with husbands out there rolling their eyes going like, yeah, just ask me. And having been a husband myself, I'm like, I know, I don't, why didn't you think of that? It's like, I don't know, for no good reason. So it's like, you don't have to peek. You can just ask her. She's giving you sacks of rice. She's talking to you. She's with you. She's in her hut some of the time, but she's with you some of the time. You can just ask her. You don't have to control her and arrange it. You can ask her, are you okay? Right. So the stronger move, the different move would have been to ask her, what do you need? Right. Like when we do 7-day healing, right? Day 3, which is the crux of what we start asking these questions. Are you okay? What do you need? What is your vision for our life? Right. So you can learn your counterpart's needs without clenching, without controlling. Tell me right now or else. What do you need? It's like, no, I'm here for you. I notice these things. I'm a little worried. I would like to know what you need. But if you're not ready to tell me yet, I'm okay with that too. But I want you to know I am here. Your hut is pristine, but the rest of the house is safe for you too. Right? In other words, you ask and you listen with your wife, Muse, as an equal. You don't need to sneak around and peek. Right? Another question that comes up sometimes. So actually, just to wrap that point just now, one more thing to say about that is another way that's come up in some conversations I've had with quite high-level friends lately is this idea of the muse. You don't need to treat the muse as this very high on. You have to bow and scrape, kind of like in the Christian, give us this day our daily bread, hat in hand, as like a beggar, right? I'm not saying this bad. Sometimes in certain systems and archetypes, that's the way you have to do it. But here, it doesn't have to be that way. The muse is with you because she wants to be with you. She can be with any other dumb slob out there. She doesn't have to be with me. And yet she's chosen me, right? Will I already am undeserving. Will I insult her even more by saying she made a bad choice, right? Let's not do that. She's chosen me. It must be for a reason. But as my counterpart, when she gives me a download, like I notice without her saying anything that she may be like looking pale or whatever, you can ask and she'll tell you. But she's not this holy relic where she tells you and you need to scurry away. She'll be like, well, I'm just, I'm tired from like weaving the scarf, right? You can engage in further conversation with her. And you can say, well, why is weaving the scarf exhausting? I didn't even need the sack of rice. I just love that you're here. And she might be like, oh, really? I mean, I don't know what she would say. The point is, I don't know. You don't know either. That's why you would continue talking to her. Okay. And that leads to my next point, which is, so you can be conversational with the muse. And after a while, you can ask, well, if she's giving the sack of rice and writing all my songs for me and painting all my paintings for me, what is my value add as the human being, right? What is my value add as the human being? And I would say the key aspect of your value add as the human being is the cognizance of what you're doing, which is holding space for the muse. Right? You have a body, she doesn't have a body. Right? You have the human spirit that wants to come through you. Right? And there's very specific things you do to hold space, to give her the power of your presence so that she can come roaring through into our world here in the form of rock songs, healings, paintings, whatever. Okay. So my role is not to create the content, right? Everything I'm saying is like coming through me, right? So my role as the human being is to hold space and to develop the portal of me, if you will, holding the profane at bay, right? So I'm not the quarterback, right? To use a football analogy, I'm the linebacker, right? I'm pushing in the profane world, making a sacred clear space. I'm clearing the lane, right? So that the actual quarterback, which is the muse, can like either run through or throw the ball, right? So for instance, in live sacred space in our session right now, everyone's in thrall, right? A small example would be, for me, everyone's in thrall. I was like, oh, the muse, everything. One might have the temptation in the middle of all this. You're very open to me to like start selling stuff, right? And it's like, it's not a big temptation, but it's like, that's an example where it's like, there's a sacred space. You don't sort of cross over into the hut. You keep the sacred to the sacred. You keep the profane to the profane, and it's very clean. And after a while, you realize, when you realize that's what you're doing, it's very easy to do that. And also, you may realize at some point. So to step back, so your job is to hold space for the content, for the magic to come through you. The linebacker is just as important as the quarterback. The quarterback gets all the accolades and the awards and everything. But back in the locker room, in the huddle, it's like the linebacker is the key. Right? The quarterback is nothing without his or her linebackers. So, and defenders. So that's your job, and it's a valuable job. And once you realize that's your job, you can therefore be very flexible with how you actually discharge that role, right, and fulfill that role. Right. So let's say you really, really realize that the nature of your gift, the stuff that's coming through you, is not compatible with the market. Right. Nothing that comes through me in Muse form will ever make me any money, will ever satisfy anything on the need or want level. Then that's fine. The way you build a hut and hold sacred space is you make money some other way, and then you leave the hut as it is. I think like Anton Chekhov, right, for instance, I think was an insurance adjuster all his life. He did his insurance adjuster job during the day, and he wrote his novels early in the morning from like 5 to 7 until he had to go to work and late at night. Right? You get what you get. You get the sack of rice, you get the scarf, you get this impulse to write plays that never make any money, and you just take it. It is a blessing. Right? It's not the muse. It's not the muse's job to feed you. It's the job of your animal self to go out and get that stuff taken care of. But when the divine comes through you, it is your choice as to how much you invest in building the hut, and how much do you assemble your life around all that. And it's interesting where you're like, well, it's such a burden. The hunter, remember in the beginning of the story, isn't told by God with 2 tablets, this is what you have to do. Right? There's no fear, threat, or control. He encountered the crane, and he chose to protect her and hold space for her. He didn't have to do that. And that's how this whole thing got started. Okay. When you're young, you have an impulse to paint, to write, to do whatever, right? You can nurture that and hold space for it, or you can squash it down. And we all get that. We all get some form of blessing in the beginning, and it's just a kind of roll of the dice how that happens. Okay, so those are the comments that I had. Gary, do you want to come back up and add some thoughts as well? Where are you? There you are.
There I am.
Hi, welcome back.
Thank you. That was for a short story. I think there was just so much to glean from. It's just amazing. But the thing I was thinking of was that it was when I realized that this short little story was like a fragment zoomed in onto the dynamics of one particular aspect of how we work with the muse. And then there could be a larger, or it could be expanded into a larger pattern. And when we did this story of the Swan Maiden earlier, there is that whole aspect of losing the muse and then finding her again, and having to cross many, many realms and to pass tests to kind of, finally get to her. This is probably just one aspect of how he finds her at first and then, loses her in the beginning, right? It's a lovely illustration of how stories as well as dreams come to us as a sequence of messages, right? and
That's right.
not every story is the full message. It's just a part of the message. So it's a constant kind of looking out and being receptive to the messages that come in, because there's something more. But what do we just read from the latest message we've got, for example, right?
But it's a lifelong dialogue, It's a lifelong
dialogue, absolutely. And what is lovely is that some of these messages, while they throw the spotlight on one or two things in the message, there's also a bunch of sort of reinforcements that come for the other messages in them, right? So there's repetition of the older messages. It's just that they take a backseat. So I'll tell you what I'm talking about when we come to the part about compassion in this story, right? And you mentioned the first talk that we had about the Muse. In June last year, that was the power of the Muse. I left a link in both the Crowdcast chat as well as live. So the story that we did there was of Theseus and how he goes into the labyrinth to face the Minotaur. And his first act to volunteer for this quest was that he wanted to stop this, regular supplying of, men as food for this beast. And it was why should people die? Let me volunteer for this. That was the first act of compassion. And that led him into this labyrinth, and also to find his own golden thread, right? Which leads him into the labyrinth and back.
Literally. And Ariadne,
right? And she leads him into it. And he has help from many aspects of the Muse throughout this quest. So we did that story. And then we did the Swan Maiden, which kind of looks very different from the Theseus story. But what it then focused was the hide and seek, back and forth nature of this labyrinth, right? And I remember in the session of the Swan Maiden, we spoke about how there is the bit of a taste and flavor of the Theseus and labyrinth story, because even going into the labyrinth to face the Minotaur at the center is a game of hide and seek, right? So there's that aspect of it, which does not come. The reason I'm bringing this up, it doesn't come up in the story at all. It just cuts short the moment the crane wife flies away. It just stops there, right? But know that, okay, so today in this message, we're just zooming in on one episode of this larger story of the labyrinth, right? It's just so healing to know that. Because we then know that these messages are like ongoing signals. They will keep coming. There is more, and there are different aspects that we will discover over a period of time. And just the assurance that this dialogue is an ongoing thing is absolutely healing. So I just wanted to bring that up.
It's so fun. So with the advisees, where we do live group advising every week, and we go into dreams. There are a number of advisees who have been in live group advising for upwards of 2 years.
Yeah.
And so, and not all of them, you don't have to be a prolific dreamer, but some of them are prolific dreamers, where every week they'll have a series of 5 or 6 dreams.
Yeah.
And one of the most satisfying things is even in the past month, I'm reading a dream for one of them, and I'll remember, oh yeah, remember this other dream that you had before where this same figure showed up again, and you had this reconciliation, and now he's here again. So something either got loose in the socket again, or he's coming to give you the next part of the puzzle.
Yeah.
And the advisee will be and then later, just out of nerdy curiosity, I'll go back and I'll try to find the old dream. And it was 8 months ago, and most of us don't even remember last night's dream, let alone some dream we had 8 months ago. And so it's super powerful to realize there's this continual dialogue that's happening. And if you miss stuff, that's fine. They're going to keep hitting the email send button until you get it. That's kind of what a recurring dream is, right? And some of the advisees are incredible because they'll give the dream and then they'll give their own interpretation because they've been in it. So they already know what I'm going to say, right? And then they give the interviews that they've done with, like, they've interviewed the crane wife, if this were a dream, they've interviewed the hut and asked all of them what they need. So there's this whole long thing that I read, and maybe my answer is, oh yeah, but how about this? How about that? What's going on here? So I'm freed up to like do like the higher level kind of stitching together. It's just, this work is just beyond nerdy awesome, because it's like any given dream, like any given fairy tale. A dream's a little different because it's giving you an MRI X-ray snapshot of what's going on within you right now.
Yeah.
And you are in this segment of your own labyrinth of life.
Yeah.
So that can give you tremendous comfort, insight, whatever. But if this is like, the 30th snapshot you've gotten in like 8 months, you can look at the entire like photo montage and start to trace out what is the symbol or what is the pattern of everything I'm going through. And for those of you who have heard the archetypal manifestation, like what did that session, Manifesting Your Life Vision, from probably a year ago?
Yeah.
When I talk about archetypes and I talk about moving from one archetype to the next, one of the ways you discern what archetype you're in right now is by looking at your dreams, because dreams are archetypal by definition, right?
Right.
So you're like, oh my gosh, I'm in the master slave archetype or a master illiterate apprentice and abused, bullied apprentice archetype. There's no list of archetypes. It's like you look at the dreams and you kind of describe it as it's being sort of traced out in the sand, So yeah, it's endless. It's endless. That's beautiful.
Yeah. And the other aspect that I think that came to me when you were talking about this was, the crane wife literally picks her feathers and uses her own feathers to weave this magical cloth, right? Silk cloth. And we've talked about embodiment in several sessions where, cloth is also a symbol of embodiment. But here it's like doubly amplified because she's using her body part to create the symbol, right? So I was just wondering, so that probably that is, the story speaks to something about the reason the crane wife lands up as, this poor farmer's wife, is that, in manifestation, embodiment is such an important aspect. So the story probably speaks to that.
Oh, absolutely. So so when you see animals in a dream, they're a symbol of your body self, right? So when you see a dog is of the masculine, but it's a dog, so it's like your embodied inner masculine. Yeah. So what are the major two functions of inner masculine? It's boundary control, protection, physical protection, emotional protection, and manifestation, right? Your inner masculine is the one who like takes the blueprint vision of the inner feminine and goes out and actually like makes everything happen, right? So like at Apple, right, the sort of iPhone company, when Steve Jobs was around, he has a very strong inner feminine. He would come up with the vision, and Tim Cook would be the more inner masculine who would go out and make all the factories, like in the supply lines, supply chains, and everything else. And so when you see an animal in a dream, it is the neck down embodied aspect of that part of you. Okay. So what's embodied inner masculine boundary protection? It's how I walk down the street and I feel safe in my body, right? Manifestation, it's like actually going out and like, working, farming my actual field, right? If I'm a farmer, actually getting the stuff done. And so when you see a bird is of the realm of the spirit, which is intrinsically disembodied because it's like spirits are, in the cloud, they're up above. But when you see a bird, then it is this intrinsic kind of integration. A bird is a symbol of embodied spirit, right? The spirit has taken on a body and come to you, because it's spirit and it has a body. A feather itself is a symbol of embodied spirit. Now, in this case, she has come to you in a way that is costly and painful to her, right? But she's taking on this pain in order to give a boon to you. So the next step then, if you see it that way, you're like, oh, okay, she's coming to me. That's great. She wants to give me boons. Fabulous, right? I'm not going to try to control or like be too nitpicky, but she's doing so in a way that appears to be hurting herself again. So it's almost like I found her in this state of pain before and I protected her. And now I'm finding her in this state again. But it's pain that benefits me. So do I still protect her? Right? It's not quite a test, but there isn't this interesting question. And so one level of reaction would be to protect her, just like stop braiding that. I just want you to, and you may lose her again because you like burst into her room. But a more sort of, I don't know, elevated, but it's like an alternative which you could evaluate and say, oh yeah, that is a better way for me, right? Everyone's different. Is to say, you notice this and recognizing her as like, at least you're equal, if not like way beyond you, right? She has reasons that you don't even comprehend. Instead of like interfering, you hold space for her and you ask her. Now, I was wondering about this, like, I appreciate the scars, but I don't need them. I don't like that you're in pain. What do you want to do? What is the matter here? What is going on here? Like, what is the state of affairs? You approach not with like interrogation, but with like curiosity and even wonder, right? And she'll be like, oh yeah, I'm doing this because like it's been fated that I must pluck out 6 feathers, but only for true love. And now I love you and I'm plucking them out. But after the 6th feather, they say my brothers will all be like released. I don't know if that's true, but I don't even care anymore. I just want to give you this scarf. And it's like, oh my gosh, you're killing me. But she tells you what's going on, and it's like, and she tells you how to support her, even though she may be in pain. And then it's up to you whether you want to follow that or not. I mean, that's the thing. It's like we are raised in this like traditionally religious environment of fear, threat, or control, right? Fire and brimstone, do this or else. God is like not around. He's like this absent father that you still fear the lightning bolts of. And in the patriarchal system, there's no mother, right? And I think, I forgot who it was. Maybe it was Joe Campbell who like once quipped that, nobody longs for the bosom of Abraham. It's terrifying, and there's no mother. There's no soft mother. There's Mary, but she's not the full power mother, right? Like God the Father doesn't fear the mother, who's not even a full God in the Christian system. And so, we're not used to speaking to counterparts on the other side of the veil as friends, as partners, as counterparts to like get things done together that we both want to get done. Everything's like bowing and scraping. And, not to put you on the spot, but there have been conversations we've had where you've had realizations of like, oh, she's like telling me we're more like cousins. And it's not like she's this terrifying grandmother that I need to bow and scrape before. And that was even more terrifying because it puts so much agency in your hands. And you're like, what am I supposed to do with this? Right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting because, the thing that comes through now because of this story, and when we go back to Swan Maiden, even the Swan wife there leaves, right? She goes back to her father's realm.
Yes.
And the hunter has to find his way through many, many realms until he finally reaches there, and he has to find her in her own realm, and then win her back, right? And it's not as easy as just walking up to her. He has to really win her back. So it makes me wonder if that is the kind of dynamic where she's put herself through so much trouble to be with you. It's not easy, right? There are some sacrifices, there are some compromises that she's made. And then when she goes back, it then is upon the farmer or the hunter in this aspect, to kind of walk up to her realm and find her in her home space, right? And kind of negotiate with her in that sense. So the next step probably is to find out what makes her comfortable and not pluck her own feathers, right? And still have the joy of being with her. It's just an amazing thing to realize. It is like you reminded me, it is like talking to the Muse and she's saying, oh, you're like my sister. It's not like, I'm your grandmother or anything. I don't have any higher power above you or over you. And we just, get to hang out. And just to realize that is a huge, huge phase of, how do I say, growth from where you were to where you are now.
It's terrifying.
Yeah.
It's terrifying. Because we're supposed to be subjects to the higher God. And I mean, we are. I'm not like, kind of disavowing that, right? But it's like, there are other modes as well.
Yeah.
Right. There are other modes as well. I mean, even in the Old Testament, right? It's like, you love God, not just as a father, but as a mother, as a lover, as a sister, as a brother, right? And it's like, well, these are not all like hierarchical command and control modes. But then the middle management of the clergy come in and says, no, it's just the father. Or else, right? And it's like, all right. Yeah. And that's, this question that's coming up in the chat of like, what do you mean by not too much surrender? So surrender to the Muse, but don't surrender too much. I mean, this is exactly what I meant by that, which is it's surrender, not in the sense of like, I'm your slave, I'm your instrument, I have no agency or sovereignty, do with me as you please, right? It's not surrender like that. It's surrender like you surrender to a spouse. Right, where it's like, I don't exactly get where you're going with this, but we need to make a decision. We don't have time to explain. You're not able to explain this to me in linear, rational terms, but I trust you. Lock and load, let's go. Right, and your spouse may be, no, I don't want to I don't want you to say, I told you so later. It's like, no, I'm not. Like, I trust you. I'm throwing my lot in with you. You're following your intuition. You can't even explain to yourself why you want to do this, but I'm just going to roll with it. And if we both roll forward together and it turns out badly, I'm not going to blame you. I'm choosing to do this because I trust you. In other words, I am surrendering to you. I'm surrendering to you. Another example that comes to mind is, let's say you are a, gender fluid, queer individual who happens to find yourself in a very conservative Islamic society, right? So it's like, to hold space for you as a portal to let your gift come through in poetry and like essays and activism could get you killed. Okay. And your Muse is like, let's go. So you don't need to just, you surrender by trusting that this is who you really are. But in terms of the actual details of like how secret to make the portal, or do you need to just like get out of that country to go somewhere where you can express yourself and not be in harm's way? These are conversations you can have with your Muse where you're like, yeah, I don't know if what you can see across the veil, but it's like, if I publish that poem, like I could die and this portal will close. So can we have a conversation about like what I need, right? I am surrendering to you, but I'm like expressing what I need, which is I need you to help me manifest a way like out of this situation. I don't know. Maybe it's like, I'm going to stay here and I know I'm going to be killed eventually, but like, give me 3 good years to like get everything out I need to get out. There's no, I don't know. Right. So where you find yourself when you're parachuted into the jungle of life with like a little bit of twine and a book of matches, right? Your muse is there in your earpiece, right? Like a spy and your support person back at headquarters. And you can ask her for things. You can ask her for support and help and protection.
Yeah.
And work out how all that happens.
So there's this question that's come up: is there a male counterpart of a muse? Would you want to talk about that?
Yeah. So in my experience, how do I say this? Just as regardless of your gender, you will have an inner masculine and inner feminine within you. Mm-hmm. Even if you're gender fluid, I mean, these are just the names. You can call it yin yang, you can call it light dark, left right, dry, moist, all of these sort of dyads, these pairs, right? Of things that seem to be opposite but really long to intertwine and integrate. The only reason we call it masculine feminine is we're not talking about men and women. It's not gender. We call it masculine feminine because in dreams, you're masculine, which is really just another name for the part of you that controls boundaries and protects you and manifests, gets stuff done. The feminine, the two main functions are nurturing and vision. Okay. So these are functions in you. Let's say your liver is in charge of nurturing and vision, right? The only reason I call the liver or this function feminine is because when you encounter her in dreams and fairy tales, she shows up as the princess. She shows up as Hera, the queen, Artemis, the midwife, right? Aphrodite, the lover of beauty. Athena, the goddess of war, of counsel and war, right? She shows up as the crone. She shows up as the witch. And so, I don't know. So I would prefer to be absolutely politically correct, but when I read someone's dreams and they tell me like their grandmother who's been dead for 40 years shows up and has a long-term conversation with her, I'm like, I wonder if that's the inner feminine. And then when you read the conversation, it's all about vision and life and blah, 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 right? So that's the only reason we call it that. It's not because of any gender constraint of binariness. So that having been said, the muse will often show up as masculine and feminine as well. The feminine version we call the muse, the feminine is the holder of vision. So like we're already on the feminine side and we're at the muse level. So it's like the high level of vision, put it that way. Is there a masculine muse? The masculine muse shows up as well. The pattern you often see is that there is a masculine muse. You don't get vision from him per se because he's like the masculine and feminine are two sides of the same coin, right? It's like saying a flower is complete. It's often a symbol in dreams of integrated masculine and feminine because a flower itself has male sex organs and female sex organs. It can self-pollinate and create fruit, right? So there is no you versus me, who's on top, who's on bottom, is it a patriarchy, is it a matriarchy? A flower is both. A flower is both. And in exactly the same way, at the muse guide, fairy godmother, fairy godfather, helper level, there is a masculine aspect and a feminine aspect as well. The Greek poets who took, their inspiration from the muses experienced them as feminine because they got high-level vision from them, right? The 9 muses are all feminine. They're the daughters of the 3 graces, all feminine. The 3 graces are all the daughters of the Queen Mother of Heaven, basically. And so there is a male or masculine muse-like figure, but his functions are a little bit different, typically. So let me put it this way. It's not the case that, in my experience anyway, that I'm a man, so my muse is feminine. The way I experience and I've seen the muse at work in like thousands of advisees is that regardless of your gender, so if you're a woman, your muse will typically present as feminine as well. You can have a masculine muse as well, but he will be doing other things to help you. Right? He may be helping you, like when you get to the point when you're actually manifesting, right? That will often come from a sort of inner masculine place, regardless of your gender. I'll give this one example from live group advising just this past Friday. And not to get into too much detail, because it is this sort of, it's not technically sacred space, but it is this sort of private advising space. There's this woman, there's this couple who hadn't checked in a few months, but she's been in live group, listening to everybody else's sort of things for continued insight. And there's this whole thing around like thinking about the vision of what she wants to do and her yoga practice and everything. And is it a retreat center? Is it a whatever? And she has a husband, right? She's a woman with a husband who's a man. And she has often been the visionary, and he has been sort of, the guy who kind of makes it all happen. She's like, he's like, yes, dear, right? She's like, she says it, and then he will go make it happen. So it's like, do you want a beach house? Do you want a cabin? Do you want land for something else? It's like, we can do anything, but what do you want to do? Finally, she's like, I want land. And long as I hadn't heard from her months, her update last Friday was basically, I'll just give you the thumbnail of it. They had just closed on 38 acres of land in the northern part of the state they're in the United States. Super excited. But she was like, the kicker was, all of this was driven. Like, I gave the general like direction, but she was like, all of this was driven basically by my husband, who I realized has his own feminine muse. So she's like, I have my feminine muse, but I look at him, he's a man. So I pound him and I'm like, you listen to me. And he's like, okay. Right. But as she heals more and she comes into more reconciliation and harmony with her own inner masculine, her husband's a reflection of her inner masculine, he starts lighting up. And in this whole process of the land deal that went successfully, his inner muse started informing him. And through the process, she didn't give a ton of detail, but she was like, he would start taking the lead in certain aspects of vision, where he would say, no, the way we're going to do this is this. And she could feel it wasn't him just being the chauvinist, patriarchal man, because he's not. But she felt that coming from his muse. And she was like, so I was in the passenger seat. He was in the driver's seat, not just the get it done driver's seat, but the visionary driver's seat. And she was like, she was like, me, I am not accustomed to being the spouse in the marriage who says, yes, dear. And she was like, I was saying a lot of yes, dears. And it felt right. I mean, this entire thing got done, and it was him like driving the vision of it, and it was like unbelievable. So, so there is this fluidity of like masculine, feminine muse. I tend to worship like the feminine aspect, perhaps because of my own wounds and biases, right? But the vision comes from her. Other things come from the masculine muse, and we all have both. We all have both. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah,
that's what I got.
So typically for me, when it's a feminine who shows up by, she's my muse, right? And if there's a male figure that comes up and I have a lot of conversation, I just end up calling him my ancestor. So that's just how I go with that. Okay, I call you this. I mean, we'll just go with that. Right?
It's still an honorific, but maybe like a little bit.
It's like Athena and mentor, I think, It's really the same thing, but yeah. It's
Yeah, protective, well-meaning, but it's like even the ancestor masculine,
mhm.
right, there's no difference in the physics from like level to level. Like
Yeah,
he knows he's going to take direction from the feminine muse
yeah,
also.
yeah.
I mean, and the thing is like, I'm not saying this as like, oh, this is the school of thought and this is the way it should be.
Mm.
I say these things as an upshot of what I have observed and experienced in my own life and practice.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying this is the way it should be. I'm like, this is how I've experienced it. This is how I've seen it. Your own experience may be different. If it is different, I'd love to hear about it because that's how I learn about this stuff. My advisees come back and tell me their experiences. They share their dreams with me. They share their dreams with me over a number of years. So I get to see like the rough longitudinal kind of arc of things. Right? This is how I'm getting all my stuff. So if you have an experience that's like different or whatever, it's like, you don't have to tell me, but it's like, this is how I learn. And I love it. Yeah.
All right. So, would you like to share the reflection questions?
The exercise.
Session?
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So we'll give a bit of an exercise. We're about 10 minutes out, so we need to start wrapping up. And again, principle 4 of sacred space, there's no expectation of participation. You can do this exercise. You don't have to do it. It's just a suggestion, only if you want. So the way you would do this exercise is you would grab some grab some pen and paper. Just find a quiet space in a room somewhere for you to be alone for maybe 15, 20 minutes to do the reflection and writing out like what thoughts come to you. If it's hard for you to find space at home, you can drive. You can drive to the supermarket to get food. And after you park, you just sit there an extra 10 minutes before you go in. Nobody will miss you. It's fine. Okay. And the questions to reflect on here for this week is just to ask yourself, what is my gift from the Muse? What is my gift from my Muse? That's it. Now, the reason I ask so boldly, right, so shamelessly, is that after this Swan Maiden story, right, if I ask, what is your gift from the Muse so plainly, and after reading the story, you give what people's typical reaction is to say, oh, I don't know what my gift from the Muse is. The Muse never favored me. You have a great Muse. I don't have a great Muse. I mean, after reading the story, I hope you would see that if you allow yourself to express that reaction, you're kind of just really being an asshole, right? Right? If you really get the feeling of the story, it's like we all have a Muse. She is taking care of us. And if she's there on the ground with a broken wing, and your first reaction is not to protect her and say, well, that's okay that you can't fly. I'm going to take care of you anyway. But your reaction is rather, oh, my Muse doesn't fly. My Muse doesn't tell me anything. My Muse is inferior to your Muse. So I don't know what my gift from the Muse is. It's like you're being a jerk. Right? And the trick is, first touch on the wall, right at the beginning of the story, he sees the wounded Muse and he just nurses her back for no good reason. He is not a jerk, and he's being nice, and not because he's going to get anything in return. Okay. So if you get that feeling from the story, then maybe it opens a little bit of a sort of opening for me to like get my thing in there, or just to ask you in a very bald-faced manner, the $1 million question: what is your gift from the Muse? What is it? Don't tell me, oh, it was this and then I squashed it. I'm not asking you whether you squashed it or not. I'm asking you, what is it? Write it down so it stares back at you from the paper in black and white. And then burn it. Throw it out after if you can't take it. That's okay. Most of us can't, actually. But at least acknowledge that it's there. At least acknowledge that it's there. Then the next question is, given this gift from the Muse, what is the best way to hold space for her in your life? How do we build a hut for her? And then you try your best to answer that one without being a jerk. Oh, my Muse isn't as good as your Muse, Artie, so I don't know, right? It's like, try not to do that. Try to hold the fear, threat, and control of the profane back to protect the quarterback of your Muse. If your quarterback has a broken leg and can't run and can't throw, then you're just going to have to hold the defense back, not for like 30 seconds, but for 30 weeks while she heals. What else are you going to do? You're not going to let them overrun her again, hopefully. And if you do, she'll be back anyway. She'll be back anyway. Okay. All right. So that is the exercise for this week, to be done in the way that I described, but only if you want, right? No expectation or pressure for participation. All right, so now I'll close the session. Our next session is next month, and I will drop the link to sign up in the chat here on Crowdcast and on Facebook. So you can sign up for that as you please. It's free, open to the public. Please share the link with your friends, only if you want. The second question, to answer your question, the first question is, what is your gift from the Muse? And then the next question is, what is the best way to hold space for her and her gift in your life? Ideally for her. And if you don't know the answer to that question, you can ask her. You can ask her. Okay. So you got the link, and then I will go ahead and close the session. So I hereby close the session of our shared sacred space. Thank you for holding this space with me and us, and thank you for sharing the nourishment, the emotional nourishment and the spiritual nourishment of the shared sacred space with us. I give you my blessing. Go in peace, bestowed with blessing, free of fear, free of threat, and free of the undue control of others. Have a great day, have a great week, and I will see you all in the next session. Happy Sunday, everyone. Thank you. Thank you.